obviously, probably the most famous U.S. soccer women's player.
Currently, yeah.
Currently. Kind of went back and forth with Draymond Green for the Golden State Warriors.
Yeah, that was a mess.
And again, I'll admit, Dave, I didn't get the full details.
You don't want to.
But I really don't want to. But basically, there was kind of this back and forth about, and Megan Rapinoe, she's always about, and as many women athletes are, trying about, equity in sports, or, just trying to get equal pay, equal exposure.
Yep.
And, one of the unfortunate things is that, when it comes to equal pay, it's a very sore subject, because the reality is that male and like, we'll take the WNBA and the NBA, for example. That's probably the clearest example we can look at in terms of a full season, is that the WNBA players, they get paid a fraction of the money that an NBA player does.
Yeah.
And you look at an NBA player, and they're averaging, they're obviously pulling in millions of dollars a year. Even not the stars. The stars like LeBron, obviously, like they're pulling in like 8 figures, maybe 9 figures over the course of their career. Yeah. And you got female players, probably making maybe 6 figures. Not even maybe like $200,000 a year or something like that. So there's obviously a very clear discrepancy between the salaries. And so, and again, I didn't get into a lot of the specifics, but basically, Draymond Green kind of came across and said, she's basically complaining without much basis.
Right.
But more so, what he's really saying is that, if you're frustrated with it, do something about it. Do something about it.
Easier said than done.
Do something about it in terms of, getting exposure to the product, getting fans in the stands, because ultimately, Dave, I am obviously all for equality between men and women.
Sure.
But the numbers they just do not add up. I'll give you an example, Dave. So the WNBA brings in $60 million revenue approximately each year. It actually costs them $70 million to operate their league. So they're operating on a $10 million net loss each year they're playing. And so the NBA is actually what's keeping them afloat for the most part, kind of subsidizing the difference and being able to pay those players. Now, they're saying that if they were to pay WNBA players, now it's a smaller league, obviously, there's less teams.
Sure.
But they were saying that if they were to pay these players equally based on the number of games played, stuff like that,
yep.
They would have to take a $30 million loss. Basically, they would have 50% more expenditures than their actual revenue.
Yeah.
Now, NBA, $7.4 billion revenue industry, and they're bringing in about maybe $2 billion in profit, and the other $5.4 billion obviously goes to both player salaries and other categories. So it's not to say that again that you obviously want equality with men and women's sports, but
most people do. I don't think that's the issue.
The financial piece of it just is what it is.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but
and so now if you want to say now who do you blame if you're Rapinoe? Do you blame networks for not giving you more coverage?
Sure. If you could do that, you could blame the fans.
You
could blame...
Do you blame fans? But how do you blame fans?
Well, that's my point.
How dare you not watch us?
It doesn't say there's logic to it, but you can blame whoever you want.
Yeah.
Doesn't make it right.
Yeah.
But I think ethically, the equality thing, because here's the thing. More money can be found. Mm-hmm. It's the whether or not some of these people want to actually go down that route and invest their time and money into helping that product succeed.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who are willing to, donate to the NBA or whatever their local team and buy season tickets and whatever, and that ultimately helps the bottom dollar. Whereas oftentimes we continue to ignore women's sports from the aspect of being entertained. Not that we don't want the women to have equal rights. Mm-hmm. It comes down to I think a lot of people just still we're slowly welcoming that idea, because for so long so many people stayed away from it because there was no and this is what the thing. This is why I don't blame the fans. I don't blame her for being pissed. She has every right to be upset. 100%. Because again, like with we saw back during March Madness when we briefly talked about this, the women's to men's weight room that was given to them by the NCAA, and how quickly it was 100% a joke, but how quickly was that rectified?
Because again, public publicity. I mean, you don't fix that. You let that linger. That might do some more damage than good. So my overall point is this. There needs to be a way to find a way to get exposure, because ultimately I think that cures most things. Exposure cures a lot of things. Yeah. And we need to grow up also, unfortunately, and some people are going to hate to hear this, but we need to grow up taking our kids to women's games. We need to, instead of just, pounding it in their heads that, it's about the men, it's about the men, it's about the men, because culturally, that's, as a man, we're going to grow up being just naturally, our eyes are going to be towards what we were conditioned to find entertaining. So I think it also starts with, again, and that doesn't mean, do I blame kids for at a certain age ultimately starting to stare at the screen a certain way versus another? No, and you can't control that, I guess. But what you can do is you can increase exposure, and that starts at home. Maybe I'm expecting a son in about a month. Introducing him to women's sports at a younger age and showing him, look at that player, and look what she can do. So just not only exposing him to the men's side of things and the men's games and football, but like taking the time to show him what these women are doing. And hopefully with time, that'll help our perception of women's sports also. And it'll lead to a lot more men and boys following, which is what we want. Exactly. But again, that fan side, there is money to be found to help with them getting exposure. There is. Yeah. So, I know you said the NBA is running at a deficit. Sure. Mathematically, I get it. Because economically, I understand the numbers. Yeah. Totally get it. But there is ways that I don't think we've tapped into yet to help the women expand their voices and get people watching them more. Because the entertainment argument, to some aspect, to some degree, is kind of BS. It makes sense to some degree, but again, I could talk for hours on it. But well, Dave,
because I don't know. Yeah,
I'm sorry, Dave.
I just want to end this here by saying I think there's more that could be done to help them, and I think there's more that can be done. Just increasing their exposure, and hopefully that'll end up helping. Yeah. Because there's still a lot of people out there, and I can attribute some of this to also just the idea of culturally. Like I look at it as, away from this argument. Baseball, a men's sport. Why are they losing so many fans? As the fan ages and it gets older and older, and so like you look at why aren't the youth and why aren't young people going towards baseball, and that's a man's sport. So you know what I mean? What aspect of these games are not attracting
and
other
Dave,
people?
You're hitting it right. It's all about fan exposure. It's about the tools that you put in place to expose more people to your product.
Sure.
And so the example I want to use, Dave, is UConn, particularly with the women's basketball team. Yeah. And obviously people now they look at UConn women. They've won 11 national championships. Yeah. And they're just known as like the standard of women's basketball. Right. Even though they haven't really won a lot of championships in the last few years, they're still considered the standard. They didn't get there by accident. It's not an accident. For sure. Obviously, and again, you say, okay, well, they have a great coach in Geno Auriemma, but you ask Geno, I mean, he, the university plays a big role in getting UConn women's basketball to where they are today. It really does, because Geno can sit here, he can coach, and he can get these players to play hard, but he had to go through the iterations of getting the university to put more funding into women's basketball, getting better facilities. I mean, he was talking about how when he first got there, I mean, they were playing in the Army Fieldhouse, while the men have better facilities. I mean these are legitimate starting points, and Geno could have sat here and just complain and say it's not fair, but I think what ultimately helped Geno and the UConn women's team get to where they are today is obviously they have to push.
Sure.
But the most important thing is the product. Yeah. Put out a product that makes fans want to go watch. Because, in 1995, and again, the team was definitely building up from when he first got there till their first championship. But when they won that championship in 1995 and they went undefeated, you had on full display quality women's basketball product. And since then, he's made it his mission to... And when you have this domination over women's basketball like he has, people say, "Oh, it's unfair." It's all the great recruits. Like, well, yeah, but because he has all these recruits, because he's a fantastic coach, because he's checking all these boxes, he has established this high standard for women's basketball.
Right.
A product that people actually want to watch.
Yeah, dude, I watch it.
And it's forced other programs in women's basketball to elevate their game. And in a way, even as a UConn fan, I like to see UConn women win the championship.
Yeah.
But when they don't, when they lose, I know it's not because necessarily that the UConn's women's team is declining. It's because these other programs have actually gotten to their level.
Or close to it.
Yeah. And that tells me that what Geno's done is he set a standard for this team that other teams have to come out and match.
Right.
Find better recruits, develop players better. Make the game more exciting.
Yep.
All these things really add up, and so, that's all it comes down to. There's some things, obviously, they're out of control.
I know.
And those things are unfortunate, but, I look at ESPN, they cover women's basketball like crazy. It's there. It's there for the taking. And even though there's some unfortunate things that still go on, to say that you haven't advanced women's sports in the last 20, 30 years. For those who are opportunists like Geno, to make it more advanced,
it's a false accusation.
I mean, let's be honest, Dave. I mean, when the UConn men were not doing so great, with Kevin Ali after winning their championship, it was more exciting to go to a women's game. I was going to more women's games than I was going to more men's games because, that was, when they had when they were ranked number one, and they were bringing in, during their 111 game win streak, and they would bring in, and they would bring in the number 2 team in the country, whether it was Louisville or Stanford. I mean, those were the games.
Yeah.
And I mean, Gamble would fill up for a woman. To see Gamble fill up for a
women's game on a Wednesday night.
On a Wednesday night.
Yeah.
I mean, that's saying something.
Absolutely.
And so
100%.
And so to kind of wrap it up today with Megan Rapinoe, it's understandable to be a little frustrated, but ultimately, what's most important is that you focus on the product. Focus on making your product the best it can be. And let everything else come into place, because ultimately that's the problem here, Dave.
I know.
Is that you can't, money does not grow on trees. But if you build the product, it's gonna start bringing more money your way. UConn today, they now have the basketball facility, state of the art, men and women, but it was this. I mean, you want to talk about equality? They designed a symmetric basketball facility on campus, so that men's and women's had equal, down to the square foot of practice space. That's not an accident. That's the result of hard work, building your product, building your brand. Yeah. And that's the end result.
Speaking of, just to kind of touch on that note, and I know we can sometimes be homers and biased, but I think UConn has done a relatively, and obviously there's issues in other regards and how they handle certain things, but I think as a university overall compared to others, I think they've done a really good job at what you just said, trying to integrate the equality. And obviously they're going to struggle from here to there, and there's stuff going around now about the rowing and all that jazz, and not being able to find money for that program, even though they did a lot of private fundraising for that school or for that program. But I think overall, I think they have a lot of people in place that are fighting for the overall, what we're talking about, the overall goal here. And I'll kind of end my somewhat.
Well, Dave, it's an important topic. I think we felt the need
to
dissect it a lot.
I don't ever want to be distasteful, and I don't ever want to come across, no matter what my opinion is, I don't ever want to come across like I'm, belittling someone or something when I know very little internally, because at the end of the day, we're fans here. We're not inside sources, or we're not in the locker rooms and stuff like that. But when we're talking about sports, I want to try to be as neutral as possible, because and by no means am I typically a PC guy, but just from the standpoint of here, like, with regards to this, there's not a lot of personal take. Mm-hmm. It's, there's going to be times and topics when we talk about things that we have more connection to and more personable or personal opinions to, or when we have a guest, maybe they can share more in depth. But like when it's just me and you kind of, just kind of spitballing stuff, I don't ever want to feel like I'm, being that guy. But at the end of the day, because when I say stuff like, the math makes sense and like economically and from a business standpoint, like, yeah, like it makes sense. It does, yeah. But I don't ever want that to come across like I'm still this, that
like I said, Dave, it's a controversial topic, and there's always going to be backlash about it. But
of course,
we've outlaid a perfect example with UConn about there's a lot to control here.
It is.
And just know that it's nothing's set in stone.
I know.
So